Avoidance is actually quite the interesting strategy because despite its negative connotations, it can actually be quite useful in many different situations. For example, avoiding the bear instead of poking at it and then, accidentally being eaten by it. However, when we take an avoidance approach to many different areas of our life, that's when avoidance becomes a bit tricky. Like for example, if we're avoiding, going to social situations or asking that person out or doing our homework or going to work, all of these things over time can, number one, create a lot of different problems in our lives as our work continues to build up because of avoidance. And then number two, our fears continue to be maintained, even if they're relieved in the short term through constant avoidance. Our fear of, for example, social situations continue to be maintained because our brain never gets any additional evidence that these situations are actually going to be okay because we've avoided them all. Hi, if you don't know me, my name is Dr. Parky Lau. I'm a clinical psychologist licensed in the state of Ontario, and I love to talk about everything mental health based. So today I'm actually going to talk a little bit about ways that we can stop avoiding every situation in our life and actually be able to approach things, especially things that scare us a little bit, in some different ways. So hopefully you'll be able to take something from it and use it for your life after watching this video. So the first strategy is understanding your why, because if there's no point in you actually making the change, then you're not going to have a lot of motivation to do it. In psychology, there's a term called motivational interviewing, where essentially this is just a fancy term for understanding why is it important for you to make a change. And a question I usually like to give to my patients is to actually play devil's advocate and say, well, why force yourself to do anything different? Like doing all this stuff sounds pretty frustrating. It sounds like a lot of hard work. Why would you kind of force yourself to do something like that? Why not just stick with the status quo? So you might even take some time to answer that question right now. Why is it important for you to make a change and avoid avoiding? And you might say something along the lines of, well, it'll be important for my work or do better in school so that I could, get into the career of my dreams. It's important for me to make friends so I can't always be avoiding all social situations. So whatever it is for you, it's important to be able to think a little bit about your whys for making a change. Otherwise, there's really no point thinking about the how if you don't have the why. So once you've determined your why, the next strategy is to actually create what we call an exposure hierarchy. And the idea behind a hierarchy is that sometimes if we jump into the deep end with our scariest fear, it doesn't really set ourselves up for success. Like for example, if you have fears about social situations, maybe the first step isn't necessarily to go right into the deep end and ask your crush out. Instead, you might start with something that is challenging but also manageable. Like for example, having some conversations with your Uber driver or calling up a friend, whatever is something that gets you moving without actually going straight into the deep end. That can be our North Star, but to start with something small. And although I discussed the exposure hierarchy in the context of social situations, you can do this for basically anything. Like for example, if you're someone who often procrastinates at schoolwork, you can create the same exposure hierarchy for things that are a little bit, for example, challenging but manageable, maybe something that doesn't take a lot of time or something that you already have a lot of familiarity with, so you don't have to worry about it so much, and then make your way up to the things that are a little bit spookier on the hierarchy list. And to support you in your exposure hierarchy, you can also do what we call distress tolerance skills. You might notice during those periods of time that your anxiety starts to spike, your fight or flight response is going up, your heart's pounding, you're feeling kind of distressed, and all it makes you want to do is to avoid and do something else. So instead of that, what we can do is target the symptoms directly. Can we do just a few deep breaths? Can we splash our face with some cold water? Can we, do some sort of like quick exercise just to move ourselves around, reduce some of like the anxiety feelings, and then move into the exposure. Somewhat similar to the exposure hierarchy, one of the strategies that really help with avoidance is to take the smallest step possible. Usually what we find, especially with procrastinating, for example, on schoolwork or doing something you need to do, is taking that first step, like going from zero to something, inertia to actually moving. So in that way, we want to make the hardest step also the smallest step possible. So you could even say to yourself, you know what, like I'm really anxious and procrastinating and avoiding this assignment right now. And I know if I just think if I have to do like 5 hours of it and think about all the steps, I'm just going to feel overwhelmed and avoid. Instead, I'll just think about what's the smallest thing I can do. Maybe I can just open up my document, write my name. I can just open up to the assignment page, read the first page. Whatever it takes for you to just take that first step so that you're approaching rather than avoiding. The fifth strategy is to build resilience to anxiety itself. So usually what happens in the context of avoidance and procrastination is that we feel this anxiety feeling, this thought, this physical sensation, and our sort of immediate urge is to get away from those sensations. So that's not going to make us want to approach. Instead, it's going to make us want to distract or avoid and do something fun, or at at least distracting, like scrolling on TikTok, for example. So the solution in this case is actually build resilience. Find some small ways for you to feel more and more okay with feeling anxious. And this could be something like, for example, opening up your assignment page and just feeling the anxiety of the uncertainty of all the things that you need to do. Or it might mean, like, for example, as simple as going to a different cafe that you normally be like, well, I don't know if I should go there because what if there's no Wi-Fi? What if, there's no drinks that I like? So you're building that resilience to uncertainty, being more okay with anxious situations and anxious feelings. And another way to build resilience is also to build mastery by engaging in behaviors that make you feel like you are more learned or that you're more resilient. Like, for example, it could be as simple as going to the gym, learning a new language, or learning a new skill, doing things that makes you feel okay. Like, I'm someone who has a few different skills, a few things I can feel really good about, and over time that actually helps you to feel less fragile to stressors in your life and reduce, hopefully, some of the avoidance. And the sixth strategy is something that I find very helpful for the people who don't really care, quote unquote, so much about themselves, and that, like, they're like, why am I doing all this stuff for myself? Like, I just can't really be my best supporter. And as a result, one thing that is really helpful for them is to actually leverage a social network to say, okay, like, it's hard for me to go to the gym by myself, but if I ask a friend to come with me on Sunday, well, I can't really kind of, just avoid going there because then I'm going to let my friend down and I don't want to flake on them. So as a result, you're actually going to be able to more likely to engage in the desired action through the use of social networks and social support. So maybe bring a friend with you. And the final strategy that can be helpful is something called stimulus control, where it's just a fancy term for how do I set up the environment for it to be more likely for me to do the things that are actually going to be helpful. Like, for example, if I usually am on my couch, my TV remote's right there, my phone's right there, it's easy for me to just go watch the World Cup or go on Reddit or do something else. On the other hand, if I were to put the remote somewhere far away and it's just my book here and it'd take a lot of work to go get my laptop, then it's maybe more likely for me to actually spend that time opening up the book and doing the work. So we want to, in some ways, make the things that we want to be doing as easy as possible and the things that we don't want to be doing as hard and sort of as tedious and laborious as possible. So hopefully this video was helpful if you find that sometimes you lean too much into the avoidance and you're kind of hoping to move more into the approach strategies. If you're interested in learning more ways to kind of manage anxiety, I have lots of videos I can throw up here. Feel free to take a look if you have some time. Otherwise, I'm going to ask you to keep on doing the good work you're doing and see you in the next one. Bye-bye.